The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. The judge, a tall man with silver hair and sharp, unforgiving eyes, leaned back in his chair with an amused smirk. His name was Judge Reynolds, and he was feared by many. He tapped his gavel lightly, shaking his head as he stared at the woman standing before him. A housewife. He could barely contain his laughter. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, drawing out the words as if speaking to a child. "You're telling me you actually think you understand the law?" His voice dripped with mockery. The courtroom erupted in soft chuckles. The lawyers sitting at their desks exchanged knowing glances, their eyes filled with pity for the woman standing at the defendant's table. She should have hired an attorney. She should have known better. But no, she had chosen to represent herself. The woman, Amanda Thompson, didn't flinch. She stood tall, gripping the table in front of her with steady hands. There was something in her gaze, something fierce and unyielding. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. "Tell me, Mrs. Thompson, since you're so knowledgeable, what's the legal precedent for?" Before he could finish, Amanda cut him off. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't hesitate. She just spoke. And as the words left her mouth, the courtroom fell silent again. Eyes widened. Mouths dropped open. Even Judge Reynolds' smirk faltered as he realized. She was right. She was absolutely right. The judge's face darkened. The laughter in the room had stopped. The lawyers, the audience, even the stenographer sat frozen. How? How did she know that? Amanda folded her hands on the table and met the judge's gaze with unwavering confidence. "Would you like me to continue?" she asked. The judge's grip tightened on his gavel. This wasn't possible. A housewife wasn't supposed to know the law better than him. He clenched his jaw, his pride burning. But before he could respond, the doors of the courtroom burst open. A man stormed inside, his face pale, his breathing heavy. He scanned the room and then locked eyes with Amanda. His voice echoed through the courtroom. "You need to come with me." Now, the events leading up to this moment had begun long before Amanda ever stepped into that courtroom. She had once lived a simple life. A stay-at-home mother, a devoted wife, someone who spent her days cleaning, cooking, and taking care of her children. Her husband, Mark, was a hard-working man. He provided for their family, always putting food on the table. Amanda loved him with all her heart. But life had a way of throwing challenges at people when they least expected them. It all started with a single phone call. Amanda had just placed a steaming pot of spaghetti on the dinner table when the phone rang. She wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and picked up the receiver. "Mrs. Thompson?" The voice on the other end was sharp and formal. "Yes, this is she. This is Jefferson and Callaway Law Firm. We're calling regarding your husband." Amanda's breath hitched. "My husband? What about him?" A long pause. Then, "We regret to inform you that Mark Thompson has been arrested." The room seemed to spin. Amanda gripped the counter for support, her knees threatening to give out. "This must be a mistake," she whispered. "My husband is not a criminal." "I'm afraid this is no mistake, ma'am. He has been charged with fraud." "Fraud?" Amanda's hands shook. "Mark would never." "Where is he?" she demanded. The lawyer hesitated. "He's in custody. We suggest you get an attorney immediately." She hung up the phone, her heart pounding. No, something wasn't right. Mark was an honest man. He had worked at the same company for years, never once breaking a rule. This was wrong, and she was going to prove it. But there was one problem. Lawyers were expensive. And Amanda? She had no money to hire one. So, she did the unthinkable. She picked up a book on law. Then another. And another. For weeks, she stayed up late, reading, studying, learning. If no lawyer could help her husband, then she would help him herself. Her friends told her she was crazy. Her neighbors shook their heads. But Amanda didn't care. She wasn't just fighting for her husband. She was fighting for her family. And when the day of the trial finally arrived, she walked into that courtroom with nothing but a folder of documents and a heart full of determination. But what she didn't expect was to be mocked, laughed at, humiliated by the very judge who was supposed to deliver justice. And now, as she stood there, proving him wrong, something even more unexpected had happened. The courtroom doors had burst open. A man had stormed in, calling her name with urgency in his voice. Who was he? And why did he look so terrified? The entire courtroom turned to look at the stranger. Amanda's heart raced. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. And whatever it was about to change everything. The tension in the courtroom thickened as the man stood in the doorway, his chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. His suit was wrinkled, his tie slightly askew, and his eyes, wild and desperate, locked onto Amanda. "You need to come with me. Now." Judge Reynolds scowled. "Who are you, and why are you interrupting my court?" The man barely spared the judge a glance. "I don't have time to explain." He stepped forward, his voice urgent. "Mrs. Thompson, your husband, he's in danger." Amanda's heart stopped. "Mark? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man's gaze darted toward the bailiff, then the attorneys seated around the courtroom. He hesitated as if he was debating how much to say in front of them. "Please," he pleaded. "You have to trust me." Judge Reynolds banged his gavel. "This is a court of law, not a playground for theatrics. If you don't leave immediately, I'll have you removed." The man ignored him. "Amanda, if we don't move now, it might be too late." Amanda's hands curled into fists. Her whole world had already been flipped upside down once, when Mark was arrested. Now, this stranger was telling her that something even worse was about to happen. But who was he? And how did he know about Mark? She opened her mouth to demand answers, but before she could, the courtroom doors slammed open again. Two men in black suits rushed in. Their movements were swift, precise. Their faces were cold, expressionless. One of them pulled out a badge. "FBI," he announced. The entire courtroom gasped. Judge Reynolds sat up straighter. "What is the meaning of this?" The agent barely acknowledged him. His sharp gaze landed on Amanda. "Amanda Thompson," he said, "you need to come with us." Amanda's stomach dropped. "What? What?" "We have new evidence in your husband's case," the agent continued, "and I'm afraid it changes everything." A chill ran down Amanda's spine. She turned to look at the first man, the one who had stormed in moments before. He was still standing there, still breathing heavily, his hands clenched at his sides. But there was something in his eyes now, something she couldn't quite place. Fear. Not for himself. For her. Amanda swallowed hard. What was happening? What had changed? And why did she suddenly have the terrible feeling that she was about to lose everything? Just a month ago, her life had been simple. She had woken up early every morning to make breakfast for Mark and their two children, Daniel and Lily. She packed their lunches, helped them with their schoolwork, and spent her evenings preparing dinner while Mark returned home from work. They weren't rich, but they were happy. Until the day the police knocked on their door. Amanda had been in the middle of folding laundry when she heard the sharp rapping at the front door. She wiped her hands on her apron, adjusted her ponytail, and went to answer it. The moment she saw the officers standing there, her stomach twisted into knots. "Mrs. Thompson?" "Yes. We have a warrant for Mark Thompson's arrest." Amanda blinked. I don't understand." One of the officers, a tall man with kind eyes, sighed. "He's being charged with financial fraud. We need to take him in for questioning." Her legs wobbled beneath her. "Fraud? That's impossible. My husband is an honest man. He would never." Mark appeared behind her, his face pale. "Amanda," he said quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. The officers placed Mark in handcuffs, reading him his rights as Amanda watched, helpless. And the worst part? Mark didn't even fight it. He just lowered his head and let them take him. As if he already knew there was no point in resisting. As if he was hiding something. Amanda spent the next few days drowning in questions. What had Mark done? Had he really committed fraud? And if not, who had set him up? She tried asking him when she visited him in jail, but every time she pushed, he just shook his head. "I don't want you involved," he had told her. "Stay out of this, Amanda. Please." But how could she? Mark was her husband, and she wasn't going to let him fight this alone. That was when she made the decision to study the law herself. It wasn't easy. Late nights, early mornings, hours spent poring over legal books while her children slept. But Amanda refused to give up. And now, after weeks of preparing, after walking into that courtroom determined to fight for her husband, the game had changed again. Because now, the FBI was involved. And they weren't just asking about Mark. They were asking about her. Back in the courtroom, Amanda stared at the agents in front of her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Not until you tell me what's going on." The lead agent hesitated. Then, he stepped closer. "Amanda," he said quietly, "we believe your husband was framed." The words hit her like a brick. "Framed?" Amanda's hands trembled. I knew it," she whispered. But the agent wasn't finished. "There's more," he said. Amanda's breath caught in her throat. "More?" The agent's jaw tightened. "Your husband was trying to protect you. That's why he never fought back. Amanda frowned. Protect me from what? The agent took a deep breath. And then, he said something that made Amanda's entire world come crashing down. Something that changed everything. Something that made her realize she was in more danger than she ever imagined. You weren't just married to Mark Thompson, the agent said. You were married to a man who uncovered something dangerous. And now, the people responsible want to make sure neither of you ever speak. The room spun. Amanda felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. She grabbed the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. This wasn't just about fraud. This wasn't just about Mark. This was bigger. Much, much bigger. And if what the agent was saying was true, then she wasn't just fighting for her husband's freedom anymore. She was fighting for her life. Amanda's grip tightened on the table, her knuckles turning white. This couldn't be happening. Her husband had uncovered something dangerous, and now, someone wanted them silenced? Judge Reynolds cleared his throat, his irritation evident. Enough of this nonsense. You're making ridiculous claims in my courtroom. He glared at the FBI agents. Unless you have a valid reason to detain Mrs. Thompson, I suggest you leave at once. The lead agent didn't even blink. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a folder. Your Honor, with all due respect, you have no idea what's at stake here. He handed the file over. Judge Reynolds opened it, and his smirk disappeared. His face paled, his eyes scanning the contents with growing horror. Amanda's heart pounded. What was in that file? What is this? The judge muttered, flipping through the pages. The agent's voice was firm. Evidence. Proof that Mark Thompson was set up by people with real power. And proof that they won't stop until Amanda is taken out of the picture, too. Amanda's legs felt weak. She wanted to run, to grab her children and disappear. But she couldn't. Not yet. Who are they? She whispered. The agent's lips pressed into a thin line. We believe it's connected to the company your husband worked for, Ridgeway Financial. Amanda's stomach clenched. Ridgeway Financial. Mark had worked there for years, handling accounts and financial reports. He had always been careful, always precise. But a few months before his arrest, she had noticed something strange. Mark had been distant. He had started working late, coming home exhausted. His shoulders had been tense, his expression troubled. One night, she had found him sitting in the dark, staring at his laptop screen with a look she couldn't quite place. At the time, she had thought it was just stress. Now she realized. It was fear. What did he find? She asked. The agent hesitated. Then, he said the words that sent ice through her veins. He found out that Ridgeway Financial was laundering money for a criminal syndicate. Amanda gasped. No, that wasn't possible. Was it? She thought back to the nights Mark had spent at his desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, his lips pressed into a thin line. Had he known? Had he suspected? The agent continued. He came across irregularities in the company's accounts. At first, it seemed like small mistakes, misplaced decimals, incorrect reports. But the deeper he looked, the more he realized that these weren't mistakes. Amanda swallowed hard. They were deliberate. The agent nodded. Exactly. And when he tried to report it, they framed him. Amanda whispered, the pieces clicking together. The agent's eyes darkened. And they weren't done. Once they got him out of the way, they planned to ensure you wouldn't go looking for answers. Amanda's chest tightened. She suddenly understood why Mark had told her to stay out of it. Why he had pleaded with her to let it go. He had been trying to keep her safe. But she had walked straight into the fire. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat. If what you're saying is true, then why wasn't I informed of this earlier? His voice was strained now, less arrogant, more uncertain. The agent looked at him sharply. Because this case runs deep, Your Honor. We've been investigating Ridgeway Financial for years, but every time we got close, someone covered their tracks. We needed proof. Amanda's breath hitched. And now, the agent said, we have it. Silence filled the courtroom. Judge Reynolds sat back, rubbing a hand over his face. Amanda felt dizzy. It was too much. Too fast. Just this morning, she had been standing in her kitchen, drinking coffee, thinking about how she would argue Mark's case in court. Now, she was being told that people wanted her dead. The weight of it crushed her. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The agent looked at her, his expression grim. Now, he said, we get you somewhere safe. But before he could move, a loud bang echoed through the courtroom. The doors swung open. A group of men in black suits stormed in, their eyes cold, their movements precise. They weren't with the FBI. Amanda didn't need anyone to tell her that. She could feel it. Something was wrong. Terribly, terribly wrong. The lead agent's face hardened. "Get down," he shouted. Chaos erupted. People screamed. Judge Reynolds scrambled back from the bench, knocking over his gavel. Amanda barely had time to react before she felt strong hands grab her wrist. The first agent, the one who had come in earlier, the one who had warned her, yanked her toward him. "We have to go," he hissed. Amanda hesitated. She glanced at Judge Reynolds, at the lawyers, at the terrified jury members. Then, one of the men in black reached into his coat. Amanda saw the gun before it even left his pocket. Her breath caught in her throat. She barely had time to think before the agent shoved her down, shielding her with his own body. A gunshot rang out. Amanda gasped. Somewhere in the chaos, someone screamed. The agent cursed under his breath. "Move," he ordered. Amanda didn't need to be told twice. She ran. Her heart pounded as she sprinted through the chaos, dodging overturned chairs and scrambling lawyers. She didn't look back. She couldn't, because if she did, she might not make it out alive. Amanda's pulse thundered in her ears as she sprinted down the courthouse hallway, her breath ragged. The agent's grip on her wrist was firm, almost painful, but she didn't fight it. She needed to move, fast. Behind them, chaos erupted. Gunshots rang out. Screams echoed through the marble corridors. The men in black suits weren't just there to intimidate, they were there to eliminate. Amanda's mind raced. How had it come to this? How had a simple court case turned into a life-or-death escape? "Down here," the agent barked, pulling her toward a side door. He slammed into it with his shoulder, forcing it open. They stumbled into a stairwell. The agent didn't slow down. "Keep going," he ordered. Amanda's legs burned as she ran, descending the stairs two at a time. The air was thick with dust, the dim lights flickering above them. Somewhere above, the heavy thud of boots pounded against the steps. They were being followed. Amanda's chest tightened. They weren't going to make it. The agent yanked open another door at the bottom of the stairwell, dragging her into a dimly lit underground parking garage. "We need a car," he muttered, scanning the lot. Amanda sucked in a breath. "What about the FBI? The other agents?" The agent grimaced. "I don't know if they made it." Amanda's stomach twisted. She barely knew these people, but they had risked their lives to warn her, to protect her. Now, they might be gone. The agent pointed toward a black SUV parked near the exit. "That one." They sprinted toward it. Amanda yanked on the passenger door handle. It was locked. The agent swore under his breath. "Stand back." Before she could react, he pulled out his gun and smashed the butt of it against the window. Glass shattered onto the pavement. Amanda flinched. The agent reached inside, unlocked the door, and climbed in. "Get in," he ordered. Amanda hesitated. Stealing a car? Breaking the law? But then, a gunshot rang out. A bullet slammed into the concrete inches from her foot. She didn't hesitate anymore. She threw herself into the passenger seat and slammed the door shut. The agent hotwired the car in seconds. The engine roared to life. Tires screeched as he floored the gas pedal. They shot out of the garage, the headlights cutting through the afternoon haze. Amanda twisted in her seat, looking back through the shattered window. The men in suits burst into the parking lot just as they sped away. One of them lifted his gun. Amanda's breath caught in her throat. "Down," the agent shouted. Amanda ducked, just as the rear windshield exploded into shards. She screamed. The SUV swerved wildly as the agent fought for control. Amanda's hands gripped the dashboard, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Who are these people?" she cried. The agent's jaw was clenched tight. "People who don't want you to find out the truth." Amanda shook her head, trying to process it all. Mark had uncovered something at Ridgeway Financial. Something dangerous. Something powerful. And now, they were willing to kill to keep it buried. The city blurred past them as they sped through the streets. Amanda's breathing was shaky. She turned to the agent. "Who are you?" He glanced at her, his eyes sharp. "Agent Daniel Lawson," he said. "FBI." Amanda's heart sank. "So you're one of them?" "No," he said quickly. "I work with them, but I don't trust all of them. Not with something this big." Amanda frowned. "What do you mean?" Lawson's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "This goes deep, Amanda. Your husband found something that could take down some very powerful people. People with connections in law enforcement, in politics, maybe even in the FBI. Amanda's stomach churned. Corruption. This wasn't just about Ridgeway Financial anymore. This was bigger. Much bigger. Amanda swallowed. And Mark, he knew all of this. Lawson nodded. And that's why he never fought back. Because he knew if he did, they'd come for you. Amanda's hands trembled in her lap. Mark had been protecting her this whole time, and she had walked straight into the fire. She closed her eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. No, she couldn't break now. Mark needed her. Her children needed her. She had fought this far. She wasn't stopping now. Amanda opened her eyes and turned to Lawson. What do we do next? Lawson hesitated. Then, he said the last thing she expected. We find Mark. Amanda's breath caught. He's in prison. Lawson shook his head. Not anymore. Amanda's blood ran cold. What? Lawson exhaled sharply. He's gone, Amanda. The prison reported an incident just hours ago. No one knows exactly what happened, but Amanda's hands balled into fists. But what? Lawson's eyes were grim. There's a good chance he's either dead. He glanced at her. Or he escaped. Amanda's heart pounded. Mark. Gone. Her whole world shifted in that moment. Everything she thought she knew, every assumption, every fear, it all blurred into one single truth. She had to find her husband, and she had to do it before the people hunting them did. Amanda looked out at the open road ahead. She had no idea where this path would lead. But one thing was clear. There was no turning back now. Amanda's head was spinning. Mark was gone. Gone from prison. Not released. Not transferred. Just gone. She stared at Agent Lawson, barely able to process his words. Dead or escaped. Neither option made sense. Neither option was good. Her hands clenched in her lap as the SUV sped down the highway, the city fading into the distance behind them. The scent of burnt rubber and gunpowder still lingered in the air from their escape. I need to see him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lawson glanced at her. Amanda, we don't even know if he's alive. She shook her head. No, I don't believe he's dead. Lawson exhaled sharply. You can't be sure of that. Yes, I can. Her voice was stronger this time. Because deep down, in the very core of her being, she knew Mark wouldn't just disappear. Not unless he had a plan. Not unless he knew something she didn't. And right now, she needed answers. Lawson sighed, gripping the wheel tighter. We need to figure out where to start looking. Amanda frowned, thinking. Where was he being held? Braeburn Federal Prison, Lawson said. Maximum security. There was no way he was getting out on his own. Amanda's chest tightened. Then that meant he had help, she murmured. Lawson nodded grimly. Or someone made him disappear. Amanda's mind raced. If Mark had escaped, where would he go? Would he try to contact her? Her heart pounded. Daniel. Lily. Their children. Oh my God. Amanda breathed. My kids. If someone is after me, then they're safe. Lawson interrupted. Amanda turned to him, panic rising. How do you know? Because the first thing I did when I realized how deep this ran was put surveillance on them, Lawson said. The FBI has them under protective watch. No one's getting near them. Amanda exhaled shakily. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe. Daniel and Lily were okay. For now. But that didn't change the fact that Mark was missing. Amanda stared out the windshield, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. If Mark had escaped, he wouldn't just run blindly. He'd have a plan. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to think like him. What was his next move? Where would he go? And then, it hit her. The cabin, she whispered. Lawson frowned. What? The cabin? She repeated, her voice stronger this time. Mark's uncle had an old hunting cabin out in the woods. It's completely off the grid. No phone lines, no electricity. He used to take us there when we first got married. If Mark needed a place to hide, that would be the perfect spot, Lawson finished. Amanda nodded. Lawson didn't waste another second. He yanked the wheel, taking the next exit off the highway. The road stretched endlessly before them, winding through the countryside. Trees blurred past as the SUV ate up the miles. Amanda's fingers drummed against her knee. The cabin was nearly 2 hours away, and every second counted. Because if Mark had made it there, then the people hunting them wouldn't be far behind. The sun was beginning to set by the time they reached the forest road leading to the cabin. Amanda's heart pounded as the SUV bounced along the dirt path, kicking up dust and leaves. The trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows across the narrow road. Lawson slowed the car, his eyes scanning the area. Stay alert, he muttered. Amanda swallowed hard. The last time she had been here, it had been with Mark. They had spent weekends fishing, roasting marshmallows, and lying beneath the stars. Now, the cabin felt different. Colder. More dangerous. The SUV rolled to a stop a few yards away. Lawson reached for his gun. "Stay behind me." Amanda nodded. But as they approached the cabin, her breath caught in her throat. The front door was slightly open. And there, on the wooden porch, drops of blood. Amanda's stomach twisted. Lawson held up a hand, signaling for her to stay back. He moved forward cautiously, gun raised, stepping inside the cabin. Amanda couldn't stay put. She followed. Her heart pounded as she stepped over the threshold. The inside of the cabin was dim, the air thick with the scent of pine and something metallic. Blood. A chair was overturned. Papers were scattered across the floor. There had been a struggle. Amanda's hands trembled. "Mark?" she called softly. Silence. Then, a faint groan. Her breath caught. Lawson moved quickly, rounding the corner. And there, slumped against the wall, Mark. His shirt was torn, blood staining the fabric. His face was bruised, his breathing shallow. But he was alive. Amanda gasped, rushing toward him. "Mark." His eyes fluttered open, dazed and unfocused. "Amanda?" His voice was weak. "I'm here," she choked out, kneeling beside him. "I'm here." Lawson crouched down, checking his pulse. "He's lost a lot of blood. We need to get him out of here." Mark's fingers curled weakly around Amanda's wrist. "They're coming," he rasped. Amanda's blood ran cold. Lawson tensed. "Who?" Mark struggled to speak. His breathing was labored. "Ridgeway. They know I'm alive. They know about Amanda." Amanda's throat tightened. Mark lifted his hand, his fingers trembling, and pointed toward the window. Lawson followed his gaze. Then, he stiffened. Amanda turned, just in time to see the headlights. A caravan of black SUVs was pulling up the dirt road. Amanda's heart slammed against her ribs. "They found us," Lawson whispered. Amanda's pulse raced. They weren't just being hunted. They were trapped. And this time, there was no running. The rumble of engines filled the cabin as the black SUVs rolled to a stop outside. The glow of their headlights cast eerie shadows against the wooden walls. Amanda's pulse pounded in her ears. They had found them. No more running. No more hiding. This was it. Mark struggled to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his body. "Amanda," he rasped. "You have to go." "No," she said firmly, gripping his hand. "I'm not leaving you." Lawson peeked through the window, gun drawn. His jaw tightened. 4, maybe 5 men. All armed. He turned back to Amanda. "We're outnumbered." Amanda swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Mark exhaled shakily. "They don't want a conversation." Amanda didn't need him to explain. These people weren't here to threaten. They were here to kill. Lawson checked his ammo. "We can't fight them head on. We need a distraction." Amanda's mind raced. The cabin was surrounded, exits blocked. They were sitting ducks. Unless. She looked toward the back door. The forest stretched behind the cabin, thick with trees. A chance. A small one. But it was better than nothing. "We make a break for it," Amanda whispered. Lawson frowned. "They'll see us. Not if we give them something else to focus on." Amanda's hands trembled as she grabbed an old kerosene lamp from the table. She yanked the top off, spilling the liquid onto the wooden floor. Lawson's eyes widened. "Amanda." She grabbed a box of matches. "This place is old," she said. "It'll catch fast." Lawson hesitated. Then he nodded. Amanda struck the match. The small flame flickered for a second before she tossed it onto the floor. Whoosh. The fire spread instantly, licking up the wooden beams. Smoke curled into the air, thick and suffocating. Amanda coughed, pulling Mark to his feet. "Now," Lawson barked. They rushed toward the back door. Gunfire erupted outside as the men realized what was happening. The front of the cabin was ablaze now, the flames crackling as smoke poured through the windows. Shouts rang through the trees. Amanda didn't look back. She pushed forward, gripping Mark's arm as they stumbled into the dense woods. The night swallowed them whole, the forest thick with shadows. Branches whipped against Amanda's skin as she ran, her lungs burning. Behind them, the glow of the fire lit up the trees. Gunshots. They were still being chased. Lawson turned, firing a few rounds over his shoulder. "Keep moving," he shouted. Amanda tightened her grip on Mark. "Just a little further," she pleaded. But Mark was weak. His injuries were slowing him down. His breaths were ragged, his steps uneven. Amanda's heart clenched. He wouldn't make it much further. "We need to hide," she whispered to Lawson. He scanned the trees. Then, He pointed to a cluster of fallen logs. There. Amanda and Mark ducked behind them, pressing low against the ground. Lawson crouched beside them, gun raised. His sharp eyes tracked the movement in the trees. The men were close. Too close. Amanda held her breath, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Then, a voice. They're here somewhere. The men slowed, their footsteps crunching against the forest floor. Amanda squeezed her eyes shut. If they were found. No. She refused to think about that. Mark's fingers curled weakly around hers. She held on tight, silently promising him they would survive this. Seconds passed. Then, another voice. The fire's spreading fast. We need to move. A pause. Then, footsteps retreating. Amanda didn't dare breathe. She waited. And waited. Finally, silence. The men were gone. For now. Lawson exhaled. We need to keep moving. Amanda helped Mark up, his weight heavy against her. We need to get him to a doctor. Lawson nodded. I know a place. But we have to move fast. Amanda glanced back toward the glow of the fire. The cabin was gone. Burned. Their last safe place, destroyed. But there was no time for grief. No time for regret. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. And Amanda knew. The real fight was just beginning. Amanda's arms ached as she helped Mark through the dark forest, his weight pressing heavily against her. His breathing was shallow, his strength fading with each step. We can't keep going like this, she whispered to Lawson. He needs help. Lawson nodded grimly, scanning the area. There's an old safe house a few miles from here. It's off the grid. We'll be safe there, at least for a little while. Amanda bit her lip. Can we make it that far? Lawson hesitated. Mark groaned, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. No, Amanda said quickly. He won't last that long. Lawson cursed under his breath. We need another option. Amanda's mind raced. They were deep in the woods, far from civilization, far from hospitals, and Mark was running out of time. Then, a flicker of light through the trees. A house. Amanda's heart leaped. Look, Lawson followed her gaze. His expression was wary. We don't know who lives there. Amanda's jaw tightened. I don't care. We don't have a choice. She didn't wait for permission. With renewed determination, she half-carried, half-dragged Mark toward the distant glow. The house was small, rustic, the kind of place that looked like it had been standing for 100 years, tucked away in the woods, forgotten by the rest of the world. Amanda approached cautiously, heart hammering against her ribs. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again, more urgently this time. A light flicked on inside. The door creaked open, revealing an older woman. Her sharp blue eyes studied Amanda, then flickered to Mark's limp body. Without hesitation, she stepped aside. Bring him in. Amanda blinked. You don't even know who we are. The woman huffed. I know desperation when I see it. Now, move before someone else finds you. Amanda didn't argue. She and Lawson hurried inside, guiding Mark to a worn-out couch. The woman shut the door, locking it behind them. Then, she turned to Amanda with a steady gaze. Start talking. The woman's name was Eleanor. She was in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair tied back in a braid. Her home was simple, wooden floors, a fireplace crackling in the corner, bookshelves stacked with worn novels. But what caught Amanda's attention were the rifles hanging above the mantel, and the way Eleanor handled herself. This wasn't just some helpless old woman. She knew how to survive, and she had seen trouble before. Eleanor pressed a damp cloth to Mark's forehead, her eyes assessing his wounds. He's lost a lot of blood. I can clean him up, but he needs rest. Amanda exhaled shakily. Thank you. Eleanor studied her. Who's after you? Amanda hesitated. Lawson answered for her. Bad men. Eleanor snorted. I figured that much. The real question is, why? Amanda's throat tightened. Because my husband found something he wasn't supposed to. Eleanor didn't look surprised. Instead, she glanced at Mark, then back at Amanda. And you? She asked. What did you do? Amanda's fingers curled into fists. I fought back. A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. Good, she said. Then, a knock at the door. Amanda froze. Lawson immediately pulled out his gun. Eleanor didn't flinch. She grabbed a shotgun from the wall. Amanda's breath hitched. Had they been followed? Eleanor moved to the window, peeking outside. Her grip on the shotgun tightened. Who is it? Amanda whispered. Eleanor exhaled. Trouble. Then, the door burst open. A man stormed inside, gun drawn. Amanda gasped. Lawson raised his weapon instantly, but the man was faster, his gun aimed right at Amanda's head. Her breath caught. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the man smirked. Well, he drawled. Look what we have here. Amanda's stomach twisted. She didn't know him, but the way he looked at her, like she was prey, like this was all a game to him. Lawson's voice was low, steady. Put the gun down. The man chuckled. I don't think so. Amanda's skin prickled. He wasn't alone. There were more of them. Outside. Waiting. She glanced at Mark, still unconscious on the couch. She wouldn't let them take him. She wouldn't let them take any of them. Eleanor shifted, her fingers tightening on the shotgun. Lawson moved slightly, angling his body. Amanda's heart pounded. This was about to go very, very wrong. And she had no idea how they were going to get out of it. The air in the small cabin was thick with tension. Amanda sat frozen, her pulse hammering in her ears. The man in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with cold, calculating eyes, held his gun steady, his smirk never fading. Behind him, Amanda could hear the soft shuffle of boots outside. More of them. Waiting. Eleanor didn't lower her shotgun. You picked the wrong house, son. The man chuckled. No, I'd say I picked exactly the right one. His gaze flickered to Amanda. You've caused a lot of trouble, lady. Amanda swallowed hard. Lawson stood motionless beside her, gun raised, finger resting on the trigger. But he wouldn't shoot. Not yet. Not unless he was sure they had a way out. Amanda's stomach twisted. They didn't. The man sighed, tilting his head. I'll make this simple. You come with us, and we let the others live. Amanda's breath caught. She knew better than to believe him. If she went with them, she wouldn't be coming back. And neither would the others. Her hands clenched into fists. She wasn't going to let that happen. But what choice did she have? Mark was barely conscious. They were outnumbered. And the enemy was already inside the house. Think, Amanda. Think. She needed a way to turn the tables. A way to. Eleanor moved. It was quick. Subtle. Her left hand twitched, shifting the weight of the shotgun ever so slightly. Amanda's eyes flickered to her. And in that moment, she understood. Eleanor wasn't just standing there. She was waiting. For an opening. For a chance. A split-second moment where the man in front of them got distracted. Amanda took a slow, deep breath. She could give her one. Amanda lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet the man's gaze. You think I'm just going to walk out of here? She asked. The man smirked. That's the idea. She scoffed. Wow. You must really think I'm stupid. His smirk faltered. Amanda took a step forward. Lawson tensed beside her. The man's grip tightened on his gun. You come in here, waving a gun around like some bad action movie villain. Amanda continued, her voice steady. And you expect me to just, what? Give up? Beg for mercy. The man's jaw twitched. I expect you to know when you're beaten. Amanda let out a sharp laugh. See, that's your first mistake. He frowned. What? Amanda smiled. And then, she moved. In one swift motion, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, and swung. The metal struck the man's wrist with a sickening crack. He yelled, his gun clattering to the floor. Eleanor moved like lightning. Boom. The shotgun roared, deafening in the small cabin. The man staggered back, a spray of splintered wood erupting beside him as Eleanor's shot missed by inches. Lawson lunged, tackling him to the ground. Chaos exploded. Outside, the other men shouted. More footsteps. More danger. Amanda's breath came in quick, ragged gasps. They needed to run. Now. Mark groaned on the couch, his eyelids fluttering open. Amanda? She rushed to his side. We have to go. Lawson wrestled the man on the floor, pinning him. They'll be inside any second. Eleanor was already moving. She grabbed a rifle from the shelf, shoving it into Amanda's hands. Can you shoot? Amanda hesitated for only a second. Then, she nodded. Because the truth was, she didn't have a choice. Eleanor jerked her head toward the back door. Then let's go. The forest was alive with noise. Amanda's legs burned as she half ran, half carried Mark through the trees. Lawson and Eleanor flanked them, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the darkness. Shouts echoed behind them. They were being chased. Amanda gritted her teeth. They just needed to make it to the road. If they could get to a car, if they could put enough distance between them, they might actually survive this. But then, a gunshot. Amanda ducked, her heart slamming against her ribs. Bark exploded from a tree beside her. Keep moving. Lawson barked. Amanda clenched her jaw, and pushed forward. She could see the road ahead now, just beyond the tree line. Almost there. Almost. More gunfire. Eleanor cursed. They're closing in. Amanda's breath hitched. They weren't going to make it. Not like this. She turned to Lawson, desperation clawing at her chest. We need another plan, she gasped. Lawson's eyes darted around. Then, he spotted something. An old pickup truck, half hidden in the brush near the road. His face hardened. There. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. Does it run? Lawson didn't answer. Because it didn't matter. They were out of options. Amanda dragged Mark toward the truck as Lawson yanked open the door. He cursed. Keys are gone. Eleanor growled. Hotwire it. Lawson's fingers worked quickly, yanking wires free. Amanda held her breath. Behind them, shadows moved through the trees. Closer. Closer. A click. Then, the engine roared to life. Amanda didn't hesitate. She shoved Mark into the back seat and scrambled in beside him. Lawson threw the truck into gear. Tires spun. Dirt kicked up behind them. And then, they were flying down the road. Bullets ricocheted off the tailgate, but it didn't matter. They were gone. For now. Amanda pressed a shaking hand to her chest, gasping for air. Beside her, Mark groaned. His eyes barely open, his body weak. But he was alive. They all were. Lawson's grip was tight on the wheel, his knuckles white. We need to disappear. Eleanor nodded. I know a place. Amanda exhaled, her body trembling. They had escaped. But deep down she knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because whoever was after them, they wouldn't stop. Not until Amanda, Mark, and everyone who knew the truth was dead. The truck rattled down the old back road, its headlights slicing through the darkness. Amanda sat in the back seat, cradling Mark's head in her lap. His breathing was uneven, his body shivering despite the warm night air. Stay with me, she whispered, brushing a damp lock of hair from his forehead. Mark's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She turned to Lawson. How far? He gritted his teeth. 20 more minutes. Eleanor, riding shotgun, was already loading another round into her rifle. If they're tracking us, we need to make sure they don't follow us all the way there. Amanda swallowed hard. Whoever these people were, whoever had framed Mark, set them up, and tried to kill them, they weren't going to stop. Not unless Amanda made them stop. The weight of that realization settled deep in her chest. They had been on the run for too long. It was time to fight back. But first, Mark needed help. The safe house wasn't much. An old barn, tucked away in the hills, hidden behind miles of dense forest. Amanda barely had time to take it in before Lawson slammed the truck into park. Inside. Now. Eleanor jumped out first, checking the perimeter. Once she gave the all-clear, Lawson helped Amanda carry Mark inside. The barn smelled of dust and hay, but it was stocked. Supplies. Medical kits. Even a generator. Amanda had no time to ask where it all came from. She just needed to save her husband. Eleanor grabbed a first aid kit from the shelf and tossed it to her. Can you handle this? Amanda hesitated. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't even a nurse. But she had spent years taking care of scrapes, cuts, bruises. And this was just another wound. A bad one, but one she had to fix. Her hands were shaking as she peeled back Mark's shirt, revealing the gash on his side. The wound was deep, but not fresh. It had clotted enough to stop the worst of the bleeding. Still, infection was a risk. Amanda took a deep breath. She had no choice but to do this. She glanced up at Lawson. I need alcohol. Bandages. Lawson nodded, grabbing the supplies. Amanda poured the alcohol over the wound. Mark groaned, his fingers twitching. Sorry, she whispered. She worked quickly, pressing gauze against the wound, wrapping it tightly. Mark's breathing slowed. Not gone. Not safe. But alive. Amanda sat back, exhaling shakily. Eleanor, standing near the window, watched her carefully. You've got a fire in you, she said. Amanda didn't answer. Because she wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about the people who had done this. And how she was going to stop them. The night passed in uneasy silence. Mark slept. Amanda stayed by his side, her thoughts racing. She couldn't keep running. Not forever. But she also couldn't fight back without knowing exactly who she was up against. Lawson sat across the room, flipping through files. He had grabbed them from the Ridgeway financial case before they fled the city. This, he muttered, holding up a document. This is what Mark found. Amanda leaned forward. The papers were filled with numbers. Accounts. Wire transfers. Millions of dollars moving through fake businesses, offshore accounts, shadow corporations. But one name stood out. A signature at the bottom of one of the reports. Amanda's stomach turned. She knew that name. Harold Vance, CEO of Ridgeway Financial. One of the most powerful men in the country. And now, the man who wanted her dead. Eleanor let out a low whistle. You've got a hell of an enemy. Amanda clenched her fists. Then I need to stop him. Lawson exhaled. You don't just stop someone like Vance. He's protected. Connections in law enforcement, the government, even the FBI. Amanda looked at him sharply. Not everyone in the FBI. Lawson hesitated. Then he nodded. Amanda's pulse quickened. If she wanted to end this, she needed to think like them. She needed leverage. She needed evidence. Something so big, so undeniable, that even Vance's power couldn't erase it. She grabbed the file, flipping through the pages. Then, she stopped. There. An offshore account. A massive, unexplained deposit. And a name. Not Vance's. Someone else's. Amanda's breath caught. Judge Reynolds. Her entire body went cold. The same judge who had mocked her. The same judge who had ruled against Mark. The same judge who had made sure he was convicted. He wasn't just part of the system. He was part of the cover-up. Amanda lifted her gaze. This isn't just about Ridgeway, she said slowly. It's bigger than that. Lawson frowned. What do you mean? Amanda's grip on the file tightened. Vance isn't working alone, she whispered. He has people in the courts, in the government, maybe even the FBI. Eleanor leaned back, rubbing her chin. Then you need to be careful. Amanda's jaw clenched. No, I need to be smart. She glanced down at Mark, still unconscious, still fighting to stay alive. They had tried to destroy her family. They had tried to silence her. But they had underestimated her. And now, she was going to take them down, one by one, starting with Judge Reynolds. Amanda stood, grabbing her coat. Lawson frowned. Where are you going? To finish this, she said. Eleanor chuckled. You're not going alone, sweetheart. Amanda met her gaze. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel helpless. She felt ready. Because this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about winning. The night air was thick with tension as Amanda, Lawson, and Eleanor loaded into the truck. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the winding back roads. Amanda sat in the passenger seat, her mind a storm of thoughts. She had been on the run for too long. Now, it was time to go on the attack. Lawson tightened his grip on the wheel. Are you sure about this? Amanda's jaw was set. I don't have a choice. She glanced at the file in her lap, her fingers tracing the name written in ink. Judge Reynolds. The same man who had mocked her in court. The same man who had sent Mark away. The same man who had been paid off to do it. Amanda exhaled, steadying herself. If she could expose him, she could bring the whole operation down. Lawson sighed. If Reynolds is dirty, he won't go down easy. Eleanor smirked from the back seat. Then we'll make him. Amanda turned to Lawson. How do we get to him? Lawson thought for a moment. Judges don't just take bribes directly. The money flows through intermediaries. Shell companies. Political donors. If we can find proof of that, we can bury him. Amanda nodded. Where do we start? Lawson hesitated. Then, we pay him a visit. The judge's house was an estate. Gated. Guarded. Exactly what Amanda had expected. Lawson parked down the street, far enough to stay unnoticed. We're not walking up to the front door, he said. Eleanor rolled her eyes. What gave you that idea? Amanda scanned the property. It was massive, 3 stories, a long driveway, a private security team patrolling the perimeter. A fortress. Getting inside wouldn't be easy. But they had one advantage. Reynolds didn't know they were coming. Amanda turned to Lawson. He won't have the evidence in his house, will he? Lawson shook his head. Not the physical evidence. But if we can get to his computer, his emails, his financial records, we'll have everything we need. Amanda exhaled. Then let's do it. Lawson looked at her carefully. This isn't like the courtroom, Amanda. If we get caught. We won't, she interrupted. Because failure wasn't an option. Eleanor smirked. That's the spirit. They moved quickly, slipping through the tree line. The fence surrounding the property was tall, lined with security cameras. But Eleanor had been prepared for that. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small black device. What is that? Amanda whispered. Signal jammer, Eleanor replied. Knocks out the cameras for a couple of minutes. Enough time for us to get through. Amanda blinked. Where did you even get that? Eleanor grinned. Sweetheart, I've been around. She flipped the switch. A low hum filled the air. Lawson checked his watch. Go. Now. They moved fast, climbing the fence and landing silently on the other side. Security guards roamed the yard, but their movements were predictable. Amanda's heart pounded as she followed Lawson to the back of the house. A side door. Locked. Lawson reached into his pocket, pulling out a thin metal tool. Amanda raised an eyebrow. Please don't tell me you can pick locks. Lawson smirked. Would you rather break a window? A click. The door swung open. Amanda exhaled. They were in. The inside of the house was cold. Not in temperature, but in feeling. Everything was pristine. Polished. Lifeless. It felt more like a museum than a home. Amanda moved carefully, her hands trembling slightly. She had never broken into a house before. But there was no turning back now. Lawson led them to an office on the second floor. Dark wood. Leather chairs. A massive desk. And in the center of it, a computer. Amanda's stomach flipped. This was it. Lawson moved fast, plugging a flash drive into the system. This'll copy everything, he whispered. Emails. Bank statements. If Reynolds has been making dirty deals, we'll find them. Amanda's breath was shallow. This was happening. They were actually doing this. Eleanor stood by the door, keeping watch. Make it quick, she muttered. The computer screen flickered, data transferring. 90%. 91%. 92%. Then, a voice. What the hell are you doing? Amanda spun. Judge Reynolds stood in the doorway, wearing a silk robe, his expression twisted with rage. His eyes locked onto Amanda. You, he snarled. Amanda's pulse skyrocketed. Reynolds' gaze darted to the computer, to the flash drive. Then, he lunged for it. Lawson moved faster. He grabbed Reynolds by the collar and shoved him against the desk. Don't, Lawson warned. Reynolds gritted his teeth. You think you can bring me down? He let out a humorless laugh. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Amanda stepped forward. Neither do you. Reynolds sneered. You think this is about money? About your pathetic husband? Amanda's stomach twisted. What are you talking about? She demanded. Reynolds smirked. You're just a pawn. A distraction. You don't even know what you've stepped into. Amanda's hands curled into fists. She had expected him to deny it. To lie. But this was something else. Something worse. She leaned in. Then tell me. Reynolds chuckled. Why should I? Amanda's blood boiled. She needed answers. And if he wasn't going to give them willingly, she would take them. She grabbed the flash drive from the computer, holding it up. You're right, she said. I don't know everything. But this is enough to ruin you. Reynolds' smirk faltered. For the first time, he looked afraid. Amanda's heart pounded. They had won. But just as she took a step back, the sound of sirens filled the air. Amanda's breath hitched. Red and blue lights flashed through the window. Eleanor cursed. Damn it, Reynolds grinned. Looks like I'm not the only one who knew you were coming. Amanda's stomach dropped. Someone had tipped them off. Someone inside the FBI. And now, they were trapped. The sirens grew louder, flashing red and blue lights slicing through the darkness outside the judge's mansion. Amanda's breath came in quick, shallow bursts. They had been set up. Trapped. Judge Reynolds straightened his robe, his smirk returning. This is the part where you lose. Amanda's grip tightened on the flash drive. No, she wasn't going to lose. Not after everything. Lawson turned to Eleanor. We need an exit. Eleanor cursed under her breath. Only one way out of here, and it's through them. Amanda glanced at the window. 2 stories up. A sheer drop. It wasn't an option. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hall. The police were inside. Amanda's stomach twisted. What do we do? Lawson pulled his gun, glancing between Amanda and Reynolds. We don't have a lot of options. Reynolds chuckled. You really think shooting your way out of this is going to help? They're not just here for me. You know, they know you're in here. Amanda's blood ran cold. Reynolds wasn't just confident. He was in control. This had been his plan all along. She turned to Lawson, voice barely a whisper. They're not here to arrest him. Lawson's jaw tightened. They weren't. The police weren't here to take Reynolds down. They were here to clean up the mess. To get rid of the evidence. To get rid of them. Eleanor exhaled sharply. We need to move. Now. Lawson's eyes darted to the desk. Is the transfer done? Amanda glanced at the screen. 100%. She ripped the flash drive out, shoving it into her pocket. Then, the door burst open. 2 officers stormed in, guns raised. Drop your weapon, one of them barked. Lawson hesitated for a second too long. A second that could have cost them everything. Amanda didn't think. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy paperweight from Reynolds' desk, and hurled it at the officer's head. It hit hard. The officer stumbled, just enough for Lawson to react. He grabbed Amanda's wrist, yanking her toward the hallway. Eleanor fired a warning shot, making the second officer dive for cover. "Move, move, move," she barked. They sprinted down the hallway, the sound of shouting behind them. Amanda's lungs burned. They had seconds, maybe less. Eleanor shoved open a side door, revealing a back staircase. "This way." Amanda followed without hesitation. They hit the ground floor just as more officers stormed through the front entrance. The only thing between them and escape was an entire team of corrupt cops. The grand foyer was chaos. Reynolds' men, the police, a deadly mix of people who wanted them gone. Amanda's heart pounded. No way out. No time to think. Lawson's hand pressed against her back, steadying her. "Trust me." She barely had time to react before he pulled her toward the grand chandelier hanging above them. Eleanor's eyes widened. "You're insane." Lawson fired twice, shattering the support holding the chandelier in place. Amanda's breath caught as it came crashing down, sending debris and shattered glass everywhere. The officers scrambled back, shouting in panic. And in that split second, they ran. Through the open door. Into the night. Bullets followed them, hitting the pavement. Amanda ducked, her heart slamming against her ribs. Lawson yanked open the door of a black SUV parked near the gate. "In. Now." Amanda dove inside, Eleanor right behind her. Lawson jumped into the driver's seat, slamming his foot against the gas. The tires screeched. They shot down the long driveway, police cars scrambling to catch up. Amanda twisted in her seat, looking behind them. Reynolds stood on the front steps of his mansion, watching. Calm. Smug. Like he already knew how this would end. Amanda's hands curled into fists. She wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. Not ever. The SUV tore down the road, sirens wailing behind them. Eleanor reloaded her gun. "Where are we going?" Lawson's grip tightened on the wheel. "Somewhere safe." Amanda shook her head. "No." Lawson glanced at her. "Amanda, I have everything I need to take him down." She patted the flash drive in her pocket. "Emails. Bank statements. Enough proof to bury him and everyone he's working with." Lawson's expression was grim. "And where exactly do you think you're going to take it?" Amanda's jaw clenched. Who could she trust? Not the police. Not the FBI. Not the courts. And then, it hit her. The media. She turned to Lawson, her eyes blazing. "We take this to the press." Eleanor chuckled. "I like the way you think." Lawson exhaled sharply. "That's risky." "So is doing nothing." Amanda shot back. He hesitated. Then, he nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's end this." Amanda's heart pounded. They weren't running anymore. They weren't hiding. They were fighting back. And this time, she wasn't going to lose. The city skyline glowed in the distance as the SUV sped down the freeway. Amanda's fingers trembled as she clutched the flash drive in her pocket, the single piece of evidence that could take down one of the most powerful men in the country. Everything had led to this moment. Every threat, every chase, every second of fear. And now, it was time to fight back. Lawson pulled the SUV into an underground parking garage beneath a towering skyscraper. Amanda frowned. "Where are we?" He killed the engine and turned to face her. The biggest news network in the country. Amanda's stomach flipped. The press. The one place where Reynolds and his people couldn't control the narrative. She gritted her teeth. "Let's do this." They climbed out of the SUV, moving fast. Eleanor led the way, keeping her hand near her weapon. Lawson walked beside Amanda, his eyes scanning the area. "Once we hand them this evidence, there's no going back." Amanda nodded. Good. Because she didn't want to go back. She wanted to end this. They stepped into the building, moving past security and into the elevator. Amanda's heart pounded as they rode up to the newsroom floor. The doors slid open, revealing the bustling, chaotic world of live television. Reporters rushed past. Cameras rolled. News anchors adjusted their microphones. And standing in the middle of it all was the person Amanda had come to see. Diane Morrison, one of the most respected journalists in the country. If anyone could blow this story wide open, it was her. Amanda took a deep breath and stepped forward. Diane turned, frowning as she took in the sight of them. Disheveled, exhausted, desperate. "Can I help you?" she asked. Amanda pulled the flash drive from her pocket. "Yes," she said. I have a story for you. The next 24 hours were chaos. Amanda and Lawson handed over the files, emails, wire transfers, everything linking Judge Reynolds and Ridgeway Financial to a massive web of corruption. The news station verified the information. Then, they aired it, live, across the entire country. Amanda sat in the studio, watching the broadcast. Diane Morrison sat behind the news desk, her voice steady and professional as she laid out the facts. Tonight, we bring you an exclusive investigation that has uncovered widespread corruption in the judicial system, one that reaches the highest levels of power. Amanda's breath hitched as photos flashed across the screen. Harold Vance, Judge Reynolds, even several high-ranking officials. Diane continued, these individuals have been implicated in a massive financial fraud operation, manipulating the legal system to protect their own interests. Evidence obtained from an anonymous source reveals that fraudulent convictions were made to cover up their crimes. Amanda swallowed hard. Mark, this had never been about justice. It had been about power, control, money. Diane's voice turned sharp. Federal investigations are already underway. Arrest warrants have been issued for multiple officials, including Judge Robert Reynolds. Amanda's heart pounded. They had done it. They had exposed the truth. And now, the people responsible were going to pay. The fallout was immediate. Judge Reynolds was arrested the next morning. Harold Vance disappeared, but not for long. The FBI found him trying to flee the country. And Ridgeway Financial? Shut down. Amanda watched it all unfold on the news, sitting beside Mark's hospital bed. He was weak, but alive, and for the first time in a long time, safe. Amanda reached for his hand, squeezing gently. His eyes fluttered open. Did we win? Amanda exhaled. Yeah, she whispered. We won. Mark's lips curved into a tired smile. Amanda rested her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes. The fight was over. They were free. And finally, for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe. Epilogue. 6 months later, Amanda sat in a cafe, sipping coffee as she flipped through a newspaper. The headline made her smile. Former Judge Robert Reynolds sentenced to 25 years in prison. Justice. Real justice. She exhaled, setting the paper down. Thinking of becoming a lawyer? A voice teased. She looked up to see Lawson, grinning. Amanda chuckled. After all this, I think I've done my fair share of courtroom battles. He smirked. Well, if you change your mind, I know a guy who can get you into law school. Amanda shook her head, smiling. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this. She wasn't the same person she had been before. She was stronger. She was braver. And she wasn't afraid anymore. Because she had proven something. To the world. To herself. She wasn't just a housewife. She was a fighter. And no one would ever underestimate her again.